Well, Eddie, thank you for joining me today, and I'm excited to introduce you to the NFT NYC community. It's going to be a fun conversation. I just got to share one with Christopher, your SVP, but you're the CTO at OneOf, and so you're going to have a totally different thought process around what OneOf is doing, what is to come, and not just your company, but the industry as a whole. And of course, you've been with us for past NFT NYC events, but this year we finally get you on the stage so everybody can learn from you. Eddie, can you please do a proper introduction about yourself and OneOf for those that are unfamiliar?
Sure thing. First, pleasure to be here, and it's great to be here with you. Yeah, as far as me, I've been in the tech industry for a very long time, always in emerging technology. Spent the last 4 or 5 years doing a lot of work in the data privacy and security and the blockchain space, and then joined OneOf previously in 2022, kind of the end of the year, to build a new product, which we're going to get to do some talking about at NFT NYC. So we'll have to save that part till then, but we're building something really new and exciting, and I think it's going to be really interesting, and that's the reason I joined.
Well, then I can't wait to hear about it. Let's talk about things that you can discuss, because that's a big surprise that's coming. Let me ask you this. For technical innovation, as a head, lead, chief of that department, in this environment, what's different in this Web3 environment when it comes to technical innovation that was not really similar to what was faced in the Web3 environment the last decade and in the beginning kind of software over the course of the last several decades? What do you find to be different today as a professional and as the chief of tech for OneOf specifically?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I've been in that whole series of decades from the beginning to now. And what's really new and interesting now is we have the ability to create a whole new way of thinking where a digital identity is both anonymous and verified. And that's never been an option in the past, right? You either had to, show an ID or have a passport or whatever it was to show who you were. And then that meant you were you, and it was traceable. And then you were fully verified, but everybody knew who you were, right? There was really no way until this Web3 technology was, unleashed on the world to be able to do those kind of things. And more recently, in the last few years, it's become more and more interesting. And that's kind of a key part of what our new platform will be doing, is producing that kind of digital identity that allows you to be anonymous to the world, but verified to the platform.
There's so many different people working on something similar to digital identity, the anonymity and the verification. They often sound like they have the same branding, but they're approaching the protocols completely different. How do you break through the branding noise when it comes to people making these big, broad statements around digital identity and what they're developing or what they could bring to you as a strategic partner? And how do you get down and really understand, is there meat on the bones here in this environment? Is there an advantage for you as a CTO with it being a public blockchain and having access to data? Or do you find it to be less advantage because everything's so new and this machine and the structure and the manufacturing of everything is not really set in stone yet? It's kind of, we're in the plane while we're building the plane, right? Flying it.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about that is there's a lot of people playing in the space and a lot of people making big claims. There's not been a lot of success delivered in that space, right? And a lot of that is because it's really hard to keep anything private on a public chain, right? And the key, I believe, and kind of one of the core tenements where we're doing a private public mix, is that it's really important to have that private capability that is a private chain, but shared between many. Right. So still decentralized, not as centralized. I control your identity. I don't want to be Google. Right. I want to have that identity shared among many parties, but I want it to be on a private chain so that all of that data maintains, again, why Hyperledger is important, right? All that data is maintained on a private chain that has nodes that are run by different people, not just us, but that has decentralization while still being private and then allowing you through verifiable credentials to be able to interact with public opportunities, right? I want to buy a digital asset, I want to trade a token, whatever it happens to be. That requires, well, with new regulation anyway, requires you to know who you are from and Europe's about to pass that new rule here real soon, that makes it even more onerous.
That's right.
So
that's right.
You have to be able to do KYC and full verification, but I can still let you be anonymous to the world, right? And the key is designing it that way with a private public interaction, keeping all of your personal data on the private side, keeping personal assets like soul bound tokens and badges and things that identify who you are off of a private chain or off of the public chain on the private, but then letting you interact with the public chain for transactions and letting them know that you're verified.
One thing that I've found intriguing is if I look at how the different layer one communities are framing it. So Charles and the Cardano community are framing this completely different than Fabian community, than what Unsolvable Domains is doing with Polygon. So that's one kind of just different kind of approaches. But when I see a lot of the digital identity stuff talked about in a smaller environment, it can kind of feel like everything is unclear as to what would be the best thing to pursue. When you look at the survey of what is, how do you decide at OneOf whether to work with an entrepreneurial team that maybe already has some things cooking and try to work with them as a strategic partner, or maybe it's an acquisition eventually, or to do it on your own, completely proprietary? How do you make these types of decisions in terms of proprietary technology that you build that's centralized compared to collaboration, and how are you navigating these decisions?
Well, personally, I don't believe in any of the centralized approaches, right? I think they're wrong. I think decentralized is the way to go. I just think that there is a chord to be struck between the public-private chain, where I can still have 30 people on my private chain, 30 different groups running nodes that are all members, right? Whether it be in a DAO type structure or something else, right? You have members that have control of nodes and run nodes on the decentralized side, but yet still have a central control of that between your members to make sure that we know what the schema is, we know what's being stored, we know what we allow to be shared, we know what the holders of the identity are allowed to then share, we know what a VC issuer can and cannot do, we know what the verifiers can and cannot do, right? And we have resolvers in place. So that is the right way to do it. And then interoperability as standards come out with, Polygon ID, like you mentioned, right? Like they're doing some really interesting things in that space, but it's still very specific to their implementation and has to live on a public chain, which is not always the best thing if you want to maintain privacy. So, there's a balance to be struck there, but I think as standards come out, a Polygon ID could just become a VC on our platform, right? They could offer a verifiable credential that we could support and they could issue and we could verify and resolve, right? So there's an opportunity there to play together in all of them now, like whether it's us supporting Polygon or Tezos, or which have very different standards. On the blockchain side, we could do the same thing on the identity side, where they just are a VC from that perspective.
Let me ask you about security when it comes to, I think there's an assumption, and it's fairly broad consensus, that having a private key and having to write words down on a piece of paper and hide it in a safe, like this is not scalable for everybody in society. So we need a different way to verify, and things are being tossed around. Your eyes, your fingerprint, maybe your voice, all sorts of different biometric possibilities. A lot of people just want to say, no, two-factor authentication, just use a cell phone. So when it comes to security, privacy, logins, and the transition from high risk to lower risk, what do you see as the most promising, and were any of the things that I just mentioned in your mind complete red flags and a landmine, don't step there?
Yeah, well, obviously passwords and writing stuff down on pieces of paper has always been horrible, right? When you could look on the back of somebody's monitor walking around the office and log into their, very secure system. That's not a good thing. And it's not any different in the Web3 world when you talk about writing down recovery phrases or, keys or whatever.
Yeah.
That's all bad. I think there's some interesting things that you can do to make passwords more reasonable, or to use 2FA and multi things without a password, as long as you control certain devices or have a device and a biometric fingerprint, right? Same way we do KYC, right? Your KYC can be your digital document and a liveness selfie check, or just a straight flat face. I mean, they're very different levels of security, but they're all options. I think what we need to do is create an easy way for people to onboard, right? For the people who aren't Web3 natives, right? Which is still the vast majority of the population, right? For them to be able to use an email and a phone and be able to get in an email with a code and a phone with a code. And I now know you have control of two things that know who you are. And then if we need to do KYC, use a biometric element to make sure you're KYC verified, and you get the little check mark to say that, you're a verified entity to buy and sell. I mean, each of those things, like OneOf is built around easy onboarding, right? So we bring a whole lot of people into the space that are not Web3 native. And then the next evolution of that is then providing a digital identity that lets you log in with various different entities, whether it be some kind of a social OAuth type thing or a corporate SAML, or, trusting those as a VC to basically issue you a verifiable credential to say that if I know my Google login, then it's definitely me on Google. And if I could prove that that is also me somewhere else, then I can start tying VCs into one DID and understand who you are and how you interoperate from various different ways. And we give people more and more ways to do that each have different levels of security. So you can opt in or not. Do you want to use your Facebook login? It's kind of up to you. There's plenty of things you can Google to know maybe you don't want to, but maybe you're okay with that. And that's fine, right? You can link it to your Facebook login. So, each of those different ways to authenticate, we need to support, and we need to tie it all into a DID with different levels of trust based on who the source is.
Well, this has been an intriguing conversation. I'm trying to think, like, what's the good last question? I'm gonna ask you this. How do you feel about being able to easily connect with your peers? How has it been trying to get together with all the other CTOs of legitimate, stable businesses in Web3, so that you have kind of a collection of friends that you all can bounce ideas off of? Like, do you feel like there's a set community that you're able to come into? Are you having to create this community with peers? What might people, or just like NFT NYC, how can we help connect you with all the other CTOs of companies like OneOf?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple things, right? Unfortunately, for the last few years, conferences have been a little harder, a little more hectic, and a little more vendor oriented, and less, being able to get a community of peers oriented. So like that would be a huge opportunity to, to have a CTO breakout room or a panel or a different social event for, technical people, engineers, CTOs, whatever, to be involved versus marketing or sales or, content people, whatever it is. I mean, they're all valuable, but they all have a different thing to talk about in community. So the BOF approach, or birds of a feather thing, would be a wonderful thing to do at the conference and have those kind of things. But most of the conversations I have with my peers are in various Discord channels, right? Whether it be something like the Hyperledger one, or, an Ethereum, like I'm pretty heavily involved in a number of different Discord channels that let me get together with people who understand the Web3 space and may be more or less technical, that may learn something from me, or I may learn something from them. And all of that is good.
That is good insight. Well, I'd like to see more of these type of peer things come up. I'd love to see these types of gatherings, private invite-only gatherings, happen at every single major crypto, blockchain, Web3, NFT event, because I think it'd be great just for the industry, for the brilliant minds to come together and try to, if nothing else, encourage one another.
Well, before O'Reilly stopped doing conferences, they used to be really good at that.
That is a good example.
Pick up.
That's a really good example. But, not only did that kind of teeter out over time. But on top of that, once the pandemic happened, it's like a lot of what was most important, as you mentioned, in gathering became on the side just to try to keep these events financially viable and sustainable.
Of course.
Well, Eddie, thank you for joining me. I look forward to spending more time with you in New York. Of course, NFT NYC happens in just 2 weeks, April 12th to the 14th. And so I appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom with all of us in the community. And of course, I learned quite a bit from you today. So I appreciate it.
Look forward to meeting you in person.
All right, Eddie. And for everybody that watched our conversation, thank you for your attention. I'll be back again with another fireside chat similar to this soon. And until then, everybody have a happy day.